Man, it's really never been a better time to be a fighting game player, has it? Street Fighter 6 now holds the record for the most entrants in a video game tournament with a 7,000 person bracket and a world finals that will have a $1 million prize pool for the winner. Tekken is taking the momentum from Tekken 7 and using it to absolutely propel themselves into the new generation of consoles. Guilty Gear Strive just saw its biggest tournament in the series history and is reinvented the game with the new season changes. Also, they finally added Johnny! Under Night 2 is finally happening, Grand Blue Rising is adding Fall Guys, Mortal Kombat 4 adding a cop character was apparently a good idea.
Police brutality coming up.
And tournaments all over the world are reaching record heights in their attendance. Fighting games are on the up and up, with Street Fighter leading the charge. All feels right in the fighting game community. But if you were to look anywhere else, you would see headlines about how competitive games are falling short. Household names like CLG have been wiped off the face of the earth, and orgs like TSM and Team Liquid have gone through massive layoffs in the past few years. The leagues for games aren't doing so well either, with players in the LCS staging a walkout due to the conditions of the Challenger League, and the Overwatch League is in absolute shambles, with several people saying that it could be the last year the league runs. So what happened? Why is an industry that was so big just a few years ago suddenly caving in? Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about why esports is dying while the FGC is thriving. So let's start with the basics. What is esports? Esports is the catch-all term used for people playing video games competitively for a cash prize. That's a pretty wide net, so for our discussion today, we're going to have to narrow down the definition to something more concise. Esports generally represents the institutions around competitive games. A lot of esports have their own leagues and franchises built up around different competitive video games. For example, League of Legends has the League Championships, the European Championships, the League of Legends Championships Korea, and several others, all of which play for spots in major tournaments like the Mid-Season Invitational and, of course, the World Championship. This is a common model for different esports nowadays, with games like Valorant, Call of Duty, Overwatch, and Rocket League having similar formats with varying sizes, with other games like Counter-Strike having a similar third-party type of system. A lot of the current championship leagues for esports are franchised, meaning that these are closed circuits where all of the teams are owned by organizations and investors. Normally, getting a team into one of these franchises is expensive, like really expensive. Millions of dollars to own a team that's based in North America. That is ridiculous. Esports used to be really small, with people gathering around in conventions and small tournaments in hotel ballrooms. The first League of Legends Worlds was held at DreamHack in Sweden for a prize pool of $100,000, which is still a lot, but compare it to 7 years later when they're playing all the way in South Korea, and the winners get a prize of $2.4 million with a full prize pool of $6.45 million. Safe to say that esports got pretty big pretty quickly, with some games like Dota 2 constantly having extremely high prize pools, and Fortnite even running a World Cup where the winner took home $3 million just for themselves. Esports was seemingly on the up and up through the late 2010s and even into the early 2020s. Nothing could stop the momentum of this new blooming industry. Oh, that's weird. I hope nothing bad comes from that. Yeah, so the entire world shut down, forcing basically every industry to try and find a new way to function. Now, normally this would be pretty bad for sport-based industries, however, this actually helped esports out a bit. Like, let's be real, when you get a bunch of people stuck inside their homes, not being able to do anything for a year, the amount of people that play more video games just naturally increases. So more and more people started tuning into esports and following these leagues. More people watching means more interest, and more interest means more money flowing into the industry. But doesn't mean everything was going well. Most esports are played at LAN tournaments. This means that players are all in the same space connected to the same server with actual physical LAN cables. This method reduces the lag factor of the game to practically zero, as there's no worry of Wi-Fi packet losses or distance from the server being an issue. Since the server is also generally on-site, there's no need to worry of someone disconnecting due to Wi-Fi or internet issues, and the computers are provided for the players on the site, so they should theoretically all be playing on the same equipment with the same amount amount of performance. However, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked, and we were all forced into our homes. Now, all of the pro players were forced to play at home on their own equipment. This isn't generally bad for pro teams, as they have the money for high-powered PCs and good internet connections. However, there is always going to be a level of latency introduced when playing in a remote location that cannot be controlled. It's not like players could move so they were all equal distance from the server. Some teams simply live further away from the competitive servers than the others did. In fact, a lot of the time, players didn't even live together, meaning players on a team would all have different ping. Now, this obviously isn't a massive problem, but any amount of lag in a competitive setting could hinder players in unforeseen ways, which isn't optimal. Not to mention, if one of the players has a problem with their system, they won't have the techies on site to help fix it, so they'll probably have to fix it themselves. So, yeah, not exactly the most optimal situation for competition, but at least esports could function under these new restraints, which is more than what other competitive leagues could say. With esports being one of the only sporting events that was still functional, it made it a very lucrative and very promising investment. So everything was well and good for the most part. Players could play their game, teams were making money, and more people were getting invested in these games. So what went wrong? What happened? Well, for a lack of a better term, the bubble popped. Esports is a massive industry. However, it is also an extremely pricey industry with a small payout. The franchising cost for a lot of the major teams means that owning a team in these games is an expensive investment that doesn't exactly have a guaranteed payout. A spot in the LCS, for example, costs $10 million. However, if you were to win the World Championship in 2022, your team would only win $2.23 million. A large cut of this should go to the players and staff since, well, they're the ones who actually won the game, so your return on investment isn't the most promising. This means you have to make money back through things like merchandise and sponsors, or through other means like content creation. While this worked for some teams with massive sponsors like Ninjas in Pajama getting their own McDonald's burger in Sweden, not every esports team was able to make the McNip burger, and eventually, investors didn't see return on investment and they eventually pulled the plug. With less investors, there's less money going into teams in the league, and with less money, people unfortunately need to get laid off and things need to be downsized. In the past 12 months, TSM and Team Liquid laid off a large amount of their staff, and Counterlogic Gaming, once seen as one of the biggest orgs in several esports, completely gutted all of their teams after they were bought out by NRG. The only thing that remains of CLG nowadays is the NRG League of Legends team. And leagues like the Overwatch League are... Wait, I don't actually know what happened with the Overwatch League. Hold on. Hey, Keeper, how did the Overwatch League end up failing? Oh! Safe to say that esports is on somewhat of a downward spiral recently, and it may be that the peak of esports is finally over, and we need something drastic to happen again for the industry to not die out. With everything becoming as expensive as it is, I can't see too many new faces entering the leagues, and getting actual new talent in these games is extremely hard. Do you know how hard it is to get scouted for a pro team? Almost impossible, to the point where NALCS players walked out of official competitions due to how Riot was treating their challenger circuit. I'm gonna have to ramble because I forgot to say how hard it is to actually get into any of these circuits. So this was originally the section where I talked about how CSGO did everything, and I went over it really quickly. Valve has since added new features to CS2 that completely make the points that I talked about irrelevant, because it has a completely new system. So we're just gonna skip to the bit where I shit on Riot for a little bit. Riot games are even worse. Like, they're so bad. So... League of Legends, right? Oh god, League of Legends. League of Legends, when you play, you can get to a high rank in Challenger. And then, if you want to get into a pro team, you have to basically be scouted from solo queue or apply to the orgs and show them, hey, I kick ass in solo queue, by the way. And then they might put you on their Challenger team, which is like an up-and-comer team, and from there, you have to fucking pray that you go from the Challenger leagues to the, like, higher-up ones. However, it is basically a joke amongst League of Legends players that just doesn't happen. Like, Challenger League is useless in League of Legends because nobody gets scouted from it. There's no clear path from like a League player to getting onto fucking TSM or some shit. Like, oh, I want to be Faker. Good shit, bucko. Getting onto a pro League of Legends team is harder than playing a match of League of Legends. And I fucking suck at League of Legends. I'm sure there's some easier ones, but like the idea of becoming pro at any major esport is insane. I just want to play with the funny people who made the McNip burger. It's hard for players to get into leagues. It's hard for teams to make money and keep their staff paid. And the hype behind these games has died down, causing investors to pull out and leave the games pretty high and dry, with nowhere to go and nothing to do. Esports is struggling right now, and it's a shame to see. I really hope this doesn't affect the FGC.
On behalf of Clark County, the sports capital of the world, we have the Super Bowl down the road. We have F1 up the road. We have every other sport, but Evo is the most important sport we have. Thank you so much.
Now, therefore, I, Joe Lombardo, Governor of the State of Nevada, do hereby proclaim August 6, August 2023, Evo Day in Nevada. Woo!
So a quick recap for those who aren't as ingrained in fighting game culture as I am. The FGC stands for the fighting game community and is a massive term that encompasses basically all types of fighting games. Traditional 2D games, 3D games, anime fighters, even arena fighters to some extent. Basically, if the game has two people that look at each other, hit each other with varying degrees of magical bullshit, and it doesn't have gameplay that looks like that one franchise that rhymes with Slipper Mash Mothers, then you can probably find tournaments for it within the FGC. The FGC originated in the arcade era many years ago. However, as arcades began to die out, the scene around those games tried to find ways to keep the spirit of the arcade alive. Originally in the arcade, games were pay to play, meaning that anyone with coins were able to come and play the games. This made them very appealing to a lot of people, as they weren't massive investments upfront. Their cheapness and convenience meant they attracted people from all walks of life to come and play them. The likelihood is that anyone who was a kid or a teen in the 90s will have fond memories of arcades and will probably even be able to tell you about fighting games that they used to play. So how did you keep the spirit of having anyone being able to play, irregardless of class and status, while not having an arcade to play in? Well, you hold an open tournament. Open tournaments are one of the simplest and easiest tournaments to understand. People pay an entry fee and they are now in the tournament. Open tournaments generally do have a limit on the amount of people that are able to join and play in them. However, the entries are generally first come, first serve. It doesn't matter if you're extremely rich or the best player in the world. If you didn't sign up in time, then tough shit, bro, you missed the boat. The entry fee for these tournaments, in the early days, were generally pretty cheap, meaning it wasn't too much of a burden on people's wallets to enter. Plus, tournaments, even to this day, will have setups that they're not using for tournament matches, meaning that you can go and play as many fun, casual games with people as you want. You can use them to practice, to warm up, or even things like grudge matches. The open tournament format gave the community something to cling on to through the dark age of the FGC. With the death of arcades, fighting games nearly went with them, as developers didn't see much reason to make a new game in the genre. According to Western players, of course. The reality is that companies like Capcom were focusing more on the console market with single-player games. Companies like Bandai Namco were still releasing fighting games with the Tekken series and Soul Calibur games. Arc System Works was still updating Guilty Gear XX, with BlazBlue Continuum Shift in development after they lost the rights to Guilty Gear. Don't worry about it, they got it back. Fighting games weren't dying, but they definitely weren't as popular as they once were. And so the community waited to see if anything would bring the genre back to relevancy. It's kind of hard to articulate the impact that Street Fighter 4 had on the fighting game community, mainly because I wasn't there at the time. However, when Street Fighter 4 released, the fighting game community grew in size dramatically. Players flocked to the game in the open tournament format that had since replaced the arcades. Since the game's online wasn't exactly the best, players who felt that competitive drive for the game began traveling to offline events, and slowly over the course of several years, the FGC began growing and growing and growing. Since then, the rest is history. Street Fighter V's released to an extremely negative backlash from the community, prompting many players to go look elsewhere for their fighting game fix. Rollback netcode was created by the Cannon brothers and has since been implemented into basically all relevant fighting games. Old arcade games are still kept alive through services like Fightcade, giving amazing rollback netcode to long-fought dead games, and the community has since seen a massive boost with the critically acclaimed Street Fighter 6 releasing this year, leading to the biggest EVO tournament ever, with a player count of over 10,000 entrants for all of the different games. 7,000 of those people playing in the Street Fighter brackets. The fighting game community has weathered many storms and is seemingly unstoppable. No matter what the world throws at it, the community around these games will always find a way to bounce back and live on even stronger than they were before. So what's the secret? Why is the FGC absolutely thriving right now? Well, I think it's a multitude of things. But let's go over the biggest difference from the start: the open format. Save for a few events that we'll get onto later, fighting games tend to have an open format for all of their tournaments, from their locals that happen every week or month to their major tournaments that happen once a year. This not only has the benefits that I have already described of letting anyone with the money compete in them, but it allows for something even better for players: a clear path on how to become the best. Let's be real, if you want to become a pro League of Legends or Counter-Strike player, there's a couple of hoops that you gotta jump through. You not only have to get to the top ranks of these games, you then have to prove that you're good enough to play with the pros and either get scouted or apply to amateur teams to get on those rosters. Only from there can you begin to show your stuff and hope that a pro team scouts you, and if you don't get scouted, then you're fucked, kid. Career's over. Are you over the age of 25? Man, you're a fucking boomer. Get lost, old man. Go play Mahjong or some shit. Why don't you go whittle your ways in the critically acclaimed MMO Final Fantasy XIV? I fucking did that for a bit. In the FGC, if you want to be the best Guilty Gear Strive player, just go to a major, beat that guy, and then win the whole thing. Simple. That's not realistic, says the person that forgot the Umi show showed up out of nowhere at last year's EVO and won the entire tournament without being signed, only being known by her local scene and hardcore NA players. Don't get me wrong, she absolutely put in the work, but you can just go and show people what you're made of. Anyone can be a champion in these games if they're willing to put in the work, and it makes these tournaments really appealing to players. Plus, it's really fun for spectators. The insanity of a 7,000 person tournament cannot be understated. So many players being in one place for one game causes insane storylines for players and creates a perfect place for newbies to prove themselves and veterans to show that they still have what it takes to succeed. Not to mention the person who wins and finally takes it can unquestionably be called the best Street Fighter 6 player. For people at home, they will be able to constantly watch high-level matches, and for the people at the venue, they will have insane matches all around them that they can watch. And they can go and play insane matches against all of these high-level players. The spectacle doesn't have to be built up over the year through smaller tournaments, because the amount of players entering alone is more than enough to make people invested and hyped for the games, and the fact that anyone entering could win makes them so engaging and interesting to watch. But hold on, the biggest event for Street Fighter so far has been EVO, and while it will definitely remain that way for a while, there's another competition in Street Fighter that everybody is talking about, and that is Capcom Cup. Capcom Cup is a tournament held by Capcom. Wow, crazy! Capcom Cup is a tournament that is held by Capcom every year, and is a cap-off to the Street Fighter competitive scene for that year. This year's Capcom Cup has the biggest prize pool in the tournament's history, having a total of $2 million for the players, with the first place taking home $1 million. This will be the finale of the Capcom Pro Tour, the official Street Fighter 6 esports event. The Pro Tour is made up of several offline and online events, with major offline tournaments, regional online tournaments, and a series known as the World Warrior Pro Tour, which has online tournaments all over the world and a last chance qualifier which will let one person into Capcom Cup for winning that tournament. EVO was actually part of this Pro Tour as one of the offline events. However, everything else is a Capcom specific event run by the company themselves, themselves, which is a bit of a shame. It's very common for bigger fighting game companies to have world tours like this, like the Arxis World Tour and the Tekken World Tour. These tours use community events for their qualifying events, with the finals being run by the development team. The Arxis World Tour has several majors around the world that players can go to, and not just in America. There's majors from Australia, Brazil, and more importantly, fucking versus fighting! The Tekken World Tour takes this a step further and has a fully dedicated point system for the players. So players are incentivized to go to as many events in the Tekken World Tour as possible. And this includes small local tournaments. See, the Tekken World Tour has a system known as the Dojo system, in which local events can apply. If the local gets in, the tournaments they run will give the players points towards the Tekken World Tour. This incentivizes players who have an actual shot of making it to the finals to go to their locals in order to get more points, which is great, because if you're wanting to get good, then there are literally Tekken World Tour level competitors at your local now, which is sick. Imagine like starting out Tekken, and you go to your local and fucking JDCR is sat there. Like, that's actually terrifying. Maybe this isn't a good system. Yeah, dude, I went 0-2. It's fine, though, because I lost to Knee and JDCR. These competitions not only let players from all over the world have a shot instead of just forcing them to play in America, but they also encourage players to go out and get better at their locals so they could maybe have a chance at getting to their game's world finals. Normally, sponsored tournaments like these conflict heavily with local and unofficial tournaments, but fighting games has made an ecosystem in which developers are officially endorsing their tournaments with things like putting them in their World Tour system or even giving them pot bonuses, thus increasing the attendance at these events and making them thrive more, which is great for basically everybody in the scene. But hang on. It's not like offline events for fighting games were exempt for the past few years. In fact, they were very much affected by the events of 2020. So why are they doing so well despite offline being cut off? Well, at first they honestly didn't. In fact, fighting games struggled with online play as recently as before 2020. Despite asking for good netcode and good lobbies, it was rare for fighting games made before 2021 to have decent rollback netcode and a functioning lobby system. For those of you who don't know, rollback netcode is netcode that has your input come out immediately, and then the opponent's game simply jumps to the correct animation once they receive your packet. Here's an example of what they look like from my stream. The fucking rollback! Before this, fighting games used netcode known as delay-based netcode, which simply forced the game to delay inputs until the packets were reached by your opponent. An easy and cheap solution, but one that led to a lot of problems when playing online at further distances. Unfortunately for us, when the 2020 event hit, delay-based netcode was the standard. But there were several games that had rollback netcode and were extremely cheap for people to play. Old games like Skullgirls Second Encore saw a massive boost in players due to it having amazing gameplay, godlike rollback implementation, and functioning lobby. Services like Fightcade saw a boost of players as they offered several different ports of old fighting games with rollback netcode and arcade perfect gameplay. Even if we look down the timeline a bit, games like Guilty Gear XXAC+R were retroactively given official rollback netcode, and they still have players to this day. Because these games had the functionality to be able to be played online with similar-ish result to how the games were played offline, competitions simply needed to be ported to online play. Not to mention, developers now really started noticing how much people were enjoying these fighting games with rollback netcode over the games that don't. Because of this, the games that have been announced since 2020 have basically all had rollback netcode. From your big blockbusters like Street Fighter 6 to your smaller indie games like Idol Showdown and Tough Love Arena at toughlovearena.com. Because of this, games can now be played competitively online even though we can leave our houses again, meaning that players have more ways to get into the competitive scenes in these games. Instead of going to your local because a friend recommended it, because you stumbled across it and it seems cool, or because you think you're hot shit and can beat everyone, now you can play online till you get really good and go to your local scene to show people what you're made of, which is a great way to get people into these games and a great way to foster the community. Plus, for people who don't have local scenes, it's even better because they still get to compete at a serious level with just the online matchmaking and online tournaments. It's awesome. Granted, it's It's not perfect. A lot of fighting games still struggle with the whole working lobby system thing, but it's getting better, which is always great. The fighting game community was born from one thing: passion for the games that we play. Thanks to its origins in the arcades and the old heads attempting to keep the atmosphere alive, fighting games have adopted the open format for tournaments en masse. The biggest event in fighting games aren't the end of the world tour or some mid-season split. They're the major tournaments that happen all over the world and allow for anyone and everyone to enter and show people what they're made of. Due to just how easy it is to join the competitive fighting game community, the competitions for this game have reached record-breaking heights and make them some of the most fun esports to watch. The growth of the fighting game community and the major events it champions were organic. The events we see as our milestones came from grassroots. It's arguable that they've lost the sense of community-ran tournaments, but the open format that they kept has led to people involving themselves in these tournaments en masse. And even though there are developer-run tournaments, they're still involved in the grassroots community tournaments, with some of them even involving local tournaments in some way, apart from Capcom. Look, I don't want to shit on Capcom, because Street Fighter 6 did give us a massive boost, but you could have put some more actual tournaments in your World Tour, Capcom. Like, come on. Just Evo? That's it? Like, it's fine. Hopefully they learn next year and this isn't a sign of things to come. The community has been through hardships and shown that it can survive basically everything. From the death of the arcades, the forced transition to online, and even specific games getting shafted over and over and over and over again. Jesus Christ, Skullgirls, how are you still breathing? This scene has shown that it will power through basically anything, and it's all thanks to how it started. The FGC wasn't forced into the spotlight by any developer. It didn't grow massively because of the investment of some hedge fund hoping to make absolute bank off of the spectacle. It was created from the passion of the players and the competitive drive that these games create in people. The FGC was created, grew, and adapted naturally. And because of that, it is absolutely flourishing. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I'm streaming Strive right now on my Twitch. Guess what? It's the start of September. I have a bunch of stupid goals you can see here, which you can get me to do by giving me money. Come join. We're doing viewer matches, even if you don't play Strive, even if you don't like fighting games. It's a fun time. We talk about a lot of stupid shit. So come join. It'll be a fun time. Maybe you can get me in those Catboy ears sooner than you think. Who knows? Make sure to like and subscribe. Share this with anyone that you think would be interested. Make sure to comment about what your favorite esport is and how Overwatch League is actually not dying. It's going to be completely fine. If you would like to support this video, I have a Patreon, which you can find in the link in the description. It only costs £1 a month to find everything on there. Granted, there's not a lot, but I try to update my fans as much as possible with stuff that I can do. And if I'm working on a bigger project, I'll make sure to share it with everyone. And if you actually go for the £3 tier, you'll get your name read out at the end of the video, like these lovely people.
Very special thanks to 64 megahertz almost nap time, Ben from Canada, Cervantes de Leon, Daniel Wiederitt, DJ Mindsoul, Fexo, Games.png, I am Naruto, Jackal Reeves, King of Games, MP04, Ray W, Rich Mine, Super, Falcon, Tom Tanks, Voltage Charge, and Zandatsu for being Tier 2 patron supporters.
Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next week.